Hello, is the static still there? Do we still have static? Hello, everyone. Is it gone? Is it gone now? God, how'd the camera get crooked again? 1 second. Let's see here, is that... Oh, fine, I guess it's good enough. Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to Merry Mythmas, which is what I'm calling this holiday season. The idea is we're gonna talk about some myths, because, you know, that's what we all love. Sorry about the preliminary issues, as you can see, testing out our new setup. It's been a long week trying to organize everything and also make it so that the entire computer system can move with everything I'm doing. Yeah, I've got a monitor that moves. Anyway, it's been a lot of work, but it's gonna be cool, I think. Today we're talking about the game Hades, which is a roguelike game where you play as the main character Zagreus and try to escape from Hades, of course. Your dad is Hades, and you're mad at him, and you gotta escape. And that is the main plot. It adapts a lot of Greek mythology and folklore into a kind of modern day, really fun and really stylish game that I very much enjoy. We're going to talk about Greek mythology, its history, how it developed, and then how it's presented in the game. How it kind of matches up to what we see in the past and what we see in the game. And we also are going to be reading some actual first-hand things. I'll have my full bibliography in the description eventually. But we're going to be reading from the Anthology of Classical Myth. This is a bunch of old people, you know, ancient Greeks writing about their own mythology, which is really fun. So to get started with our Greek dive into Greek folklore, let's take a look at our map here. When we talk about Greek mythology, it's not the Greece of today only. You know, in your mind you probably think of the country of Greece, but it also included a lot of other areas that kind of had, you know, a bunch of different city-states that interacted together and traded, and a lot of them were in Greece, and some of them were in other areas around the, I believe, Aegean Sea. And so when we discuss Greek mythology, we're really talking about this area of the world. Why do people think Hades is a dick when he's pretty chill in the actual mythology? We'll get there. But we'll start with the kind of the setup of this is the world that they were living in. They were seafarers, but it took a while for them to really get far enough to realize that there was more land beyond ocean, which is why originally they actually thought that Hades was beyond the ocean, but we'll get to that. They were a lot of different various groups. There are theories that originally the country had something of a matriarchal mythology, that characters, mother goddesses like Demeter were probably very, very important, and then other groups invaded, bringing their sky gods with them, and so you see Zeus and other big male figures take over these prominent roles. A lot of it is really mixed together by all these different cultures that are trading together, like the Middle East and Egypt and all these different countries interacting together. Alright, let's see here. There is an actual painting of the underworld. Yes, I am wearing my Henry shirt. This is a painting of the underworld, and it's actually got Hermes in there. We'll talk about him later. The underworld was, really, it was a place to tell stories, kind of. It was, what is the underworld? The Chthonian gods that are underneath there. Chthonian comes from a Greek word, chthon, I don't know if that's how you say it, that refers to earth. Not specifically the earth you see, it's the under-earth. So Demeter and Gaia and all them are the earth that you can see with your eyes, the ground, the fertile land. Chthonian gods are under the earth. They are the under the earth gods, and they live in the underworld. In the Iliad, it was believed to lie beneath the secret places of the earth. But technically, originally, they thought of it as being beyond the ocean. They thought the world was flat, and that the ocean was actually a river that circled the entire world, which was their flat world. Eventually, they went far enough on their boats to see that that was not the case, but the original concept of the underworld was that it was beyond the river or the ocean. You had to cross it on a boat and get to the underworld on the other side. That's kind of part of where, theoretically, the idea of having to cross the river to get to the underworld came from. When they traveled enough to see that there were places beyond the ocean, the idea of the underworld moved underground. It is often referred to as the House of Hades. In the game, they talk about it being the House of Hades. That's not something that they just cooked up. That's in a lot of prayers and ancient scripture and writing. It is referred to as the House of Hades. It is in early depictions, it's kind of a boring place. It's not the kind of idea where some other cultures see it as a place of punishment or reward. It just kind of is there. And most people just chilled there. You had to be really awful to be punished. It was described as a dismal house of retirement. It was boring, you didn't have anything to do, you were just done. It changed over time and developed other features, but the original concept was just this gray, dismal land of the dead. We end up with eventually these developments leading to different parts of the underworld, where the gray, dismal world of the dead is still kind of there. That's the meadows of Asphodel, one of the locations in the game. The asphodel was a flower that grew in cemeteries. It was seen as being very strange, pallid, and ghostly. And so the meadows of Asphodel were the boring retirement home that most people went to. You know, you just kind of chilled out in the fields and the flowers and had your retirement. The deep, darkest part was called Tartarus, and that is where they imprisoned all the worst people, which is technically just the people that offended the gods. If you pissed off the gods, you got sent to Hades. For instance, Sisyphus, who is in the Hades game, he pissed off Zeus by telling on Zeus when he kidnapped somebody. He kidnapped a girl, and Sisyphus saw it and said, "That's not good," and went and told the girl's father, and Zeus got mad at him for that, and that's why he's in the underworld pushing his boulder. Not exactly a bad guy, but Tartarus is saved for the people that piss off the gods. Tartarus was a gloomy place in the House of Hades that is as far away from Earth as Earth is from the sky. It was said to be surrounded by not one, not two, but 3 walls, and outside those 3 walls was the river Phlegathon. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it was the river of fire, which is one of the rivers that shows up in the game. There was also an area called Erebus, which was kind of the original darkness. Sometimes Erebus is a person, sometimes it's just a place. Erebus is the ultimate darkness, the embodiment of darkness, and sometimes was the husband of Nyx, who we will talk about. Elysium was developed eventually as a place with perfect weather and soft breezes, and it was only home to the demigods. Basically, the underworld was really originally very skewed towards the gods. If you pissed them off, you went to hell, went to Tartarus. If you were their family, you got to go to the Elysium Fields, and everybody else went to the boring retirement home. Eventually, stories developed where Elysium could be open to anyone if you were a great hero, if you were a very just and awesome person, if you were related to a god, then you got to go into Elysium. So there are the 5 rivers. I mentioned in the most ancient stories, ocean was a river you crossed to get to hell. Well, there's actually, once they develop more of a specific kind of map of hell, there are 5 of them. Acheron is the first river, and it's an actual river in Greece. A lot of rivers in Greece, especially ones that go underground, are said to be roads leading to the underworld. Acheron is the river of woe, and originally he was a Titan, which is one of the race of ancients. You know, before the Olympian gods, there were the Titans. Acheron was one of them. There was a war between the Titans and the gods, and the Titans lost. For punishment for being in the war, Acheron is thrown by Zeus into hell, and he turns into a river, which I guess is a punishment. Cocytus is the second river. It is called the Black River. Lethe is the forgetfulness river. You drink from that river to forget your mortal life when you're reborn, or, you know, forget your suffering. And then, of course, the river of fire, Plekthon. I meant to look this one up before I started and totally forgot. And then the last one is Styx. Styx, funny enough, is also a person sometimes in Greek myth. She was a nymph, and she served in the war on the gods' side. So as a reward, they said that the gods, whenever they swear something, they will swear by Styx, swear by the river Styx. Which means one person was thrown into hell and turned into a river as a punishment, and one person was thrown into hell and turned into a river as a reward. I guess. Who knows? Sometimes this character is actually presented as Hades' wife, but for the most part, Styx is just the river that you cross. To get to the underworld, you have to pass through the Grove of Persephone, which is a garden that's outside of the underworld. Then you get to the River of Acheron that leads into the adamantine gates of Tartarus. That's where you find Cerberus. He is a 50-headed dog with necks covered in snakes and poisonous drool. Most of the time you will see him with only 3 heads, but the oldest stories have him with 50 heads. He permits all spirits to enter and none to return. There are stories where he behaves very much like a dog. He's very sweet and lovable and lick in your face, and then once you're in hell and you try to leave, he will bite your head off. Once you get past him, you get to the river, and which river it is changes. Acheron's the one that leads in. Sometimes that's the river that Charon crosses. Sometimes it's the Styx. To get across, you have to have an obol, which is the money in the game, and is a real Greek denomination. And what would happen is when a person died, they had the obol put in their mouth, and they were burned. They were cremated. This comes from a myth. I believe Hercules had to cremate someone. And so you have to do this proper burial, obol in the mouth, cremate them, so that they can get to the underworld properly and hand over the money, cross the river. If you don't have any money, you aren't going anywhere. Sometimes stories say that means you're damned for all eternity. Sometimes you have to wait 100 years. Basically, it's like a Disney Fast Pass. If you have the money, you can go right ahead. Otherwise, you have to wait. Let's see here. Once you get inside, you're brought before Hades and his 3 judges. The 3 judges are Rhadamanthus, Minos, and Acus, all of whom were former mortals and sons of Zeus. Minos you probably recognize. He's in that whole Minotaur bit. I don't know that he's that wise. Not sure I would give him the job of judge, but they will judge you. There's actually some stories that say that Rhadamanthus judges those from the Asian continent and Minos from Greece and European continent, which is everyone. So basically, that was their whole world, were those 2 kind of continents, and that's, they divided them all up. Acus was supposed to be the one that has the keys to the underworld. There also was a trench of blood running through the underworld, and this blood was a delicacy. It was the blood of all the sacrificed rams and ewes that people would sacrifice to hell, and the ghosts loved to drink it. It was their favorite thing. Achilles in his rage fought a river. I wouldn't be surprised by that. I do remember that. Wasn't he the son of Poseidon, maybe? I don't remember everything about Achilles and the Trojan War and all, but Achilles did have some fun adventures, and we may talk about him. I don't know if we'll get to him, because there's a lot to talk about, but we might get to him. Alright, so the underworld, you got your map, you kind of figured out where it is. It's, of course, ruled by Hades and Persephone, who we'll talk about. They end up being very much associated with magic and spell casting. And so once we get to talking about them, we're going to end up talking about a lot of spell casting that involves invoking Persephone the Terrible, which is one of the things they call her. It's very fascinating. But before we get talking to the actual people that live in Hades, let's talk about, all of our gods and people that are in this game. So we're going to talk one by one through the various characters. We're going to start with some of the lesser... not lesser, but the ones I find least interesting will build up to the end. But, well, of course, before we get to the gods, gotta talk about good old Zag. Zagreus is the main character of Hades. He is the son of Zeus. Spoilers, his mom is Persephone. That's the main point of the game. But is he a real Greek god? Well, the answer is yes, and the answer is no. The name Zagreus, the oldest version of that name, appears in a mention that names him as the husband of Gaia, Mother Gaia, who is the mother of the Olympians. From the previous generation, she's mother of Rhea, maybe the mother of the Titans. That's it. She's the mother of the Titans. And that he is the highest god. Gaia's husband in Greece is Oranos, which is the sky, so you think highest god would be the sky. This is kind of associating Zagreus with the sky, which is one of the primordial father gods. But for the most part, a lot of Zagreus kind of vanishes into the myths of another god. His name was the hunter who catches living animals, is what that name means. And he's heavily associated with eating raw flesh. His myth is that he was either, depending on which version you see, he's either the son of Hades and Persephone, or of Zeus and another woman, I believe Hera. It varies. And he is killed and eaten by Titans. He is saved by someone, Apollo or Hermes or Demeter or somebody, and resurrected. Yay! Baby's back. As punishment, Zeus destroys the Titans, and from the ashes creates humanity. And the idea of this is that in the ashes, you know, because they ate most of Zag. Zag is goodness, Titan is evil. Put the two together, good and evil, you got humans. And so this is a very early creation myth that's very central to a religion called Orpheism, which believes basically that Zagreus is the highest of gods. They love, they're trying to kind of compare it to Buddhism a little bit, but without all the, like, you know, the Buddha. It's more about, we're trying to get out of the cycle of life and death, the way that Orpheus did, because he went into hell and came back. The way that I almost gave it away. The way that Zagreus did by dying and coming back. You know, we need to try and be like them and die and come back as immortals and live, you know, that kind of thing. They were trying to escape the reincarnation cycle. But Zagreus, the name, vanishes mostly from history, other than these little pieces of these little notes, like Euripides mentions night-ranging Zagreus performing his feasts of raw flesh. He was really heavily associated with feasting on raw meat. But he wasn't really a character in Greek mythology. He was probably from Crete, which is an area it's like an island, I believe, in the kind of south of this area. But as a figure in Greek mythology, you're not going to hear of him. You're going to hear of somebody else who stole his story. But we will get to that character in a little bit. Alright, so we've talked about Zag. Let's talk about his dad. Hades has a lot of names. Dionysus, or Pluto, which means riches. Dispater. Hades means the unseen. He's heavily associated with being invisible and with money. Especially in Rome, they really preferred him as kind of the ruler of riches than they did the underworld. But both are associated with, you know, gemstones and things that you find underground, so he was the god of both. He's not the god of death. He is the god of the dead. He had, of course, Persephone as his wife, but that wasn't his only partner. He was less likely to be cheat on his wife, less likely, but he did do it twice. Other than the few myths that say that Styx was his wife, there was also a nymph named Minth, which that's fun to say. Nymph named Minth. She was his lover. Persephone got jealous and trampled her to death, and so he turned her into mint, and that was an honored plant in the underworld. There was also Luce, who was a daughter of Oceanus, and apparently she died a natural death and just, I guess, turned into a tree in the underworld, a white tree in the underworld. So, he doesn't have that many love affairs. He does have a few, but not that many. He typically appeared as a very stern god. He had a beard, crowned head, he had a key and a scepter. The depiction there shows him with Cerberus, which looks like the world's smallest Cerberus. I love it. But they have a pretty typical appearance, other than the fact that he's a lot beefier maybe than of course the Greeks would have had him. He's got his beard, he's got his crown, you know, he has the look of Hades. He had a helmet of invisibility, which he uses in a fight, which was a gift from the Cyclops. He helped them escape, and they said, hey, cool, have a helmet. I don't know why they didn't use the helmet of invisibility to escape themselves, but it's a myth. He rarely leaves the underworld. There are only 2 stories that involve him leaving once he's given that job the Persephone story, and there's a story where he's injured and has to go find the god of healing to be healed, which is funny because he didn't like the guy, because the guy once cured a man of death, and Hades never forgot that. He was not fond of that. If you want to attract his attention, if you want to get his attention, you should strike the ground with your hand or with a rod twice, and then sacrifice a black ram. That is how you get his attention. He is Hades of the dark locks, the prince of worn-out men. Very interesting. And Akatsuki did mention earlier that he seems to be disliked. The story seems to go that the gods drew lots as to who would rule where, and Hades drew the underworld and didn't like it. And so it was said that he was always very bitter and nobody liked him because he was bitter. For the most part, it seems like he's just kind of forgotten in the myths. The location of the underworld itself was more important in the stories than he was. And in fact, a lot of the times, Persephone shines over him instead, where a lot of the prayers to the underworld and a lot of the stories focus more on her. But we will get to her. In fact, we may be just getting to her. We are! Persephone! Persephone has a lot of names. Prosperina to the Romans. Kore is another name for her. It's a Greek word meaning maiden. More than likely, Kore was once a different goddess, and in fact was probably part of Demeter, another goddess who is Persephone's mom. Demeter and Persephone are hard to talk about without talking about both of them. Originally, more than likely, Demeter was one goddess who had multiple aspects, based on the fact that she was probably a goddess of fertility, of the seasons, of the growing things. And there was a kind of a maiden crone mother kind of aspect to her, where she represented youth, and she represented the middle-aged woman, she represented the older woman. And eventually, as the stories developed and different other stories got fused into them, those characters separated into first three and then more like two characters, where Kore was the maiden, the young version of the goddess, Persephone was the middle-aged, the wife goddess, and then Demeter was the older mourning mother who had lost her daughter. Persephone, her name possibly has something to do with light, because phone is a word that means light in Greek. One of her epithets, which all the gods have dozens of extra names that refer to specific powers they have or temperaments they have. Soteria means savior or deliverer, and Persephone Soteria is one of her names. Her parents are Demeter and Zeus by force, or Zeus and Rhea, which was the mother of the gods, so that's Zeus's mom. But it's okay because they did it as snakes. In some of the myths, they gave birth to Persephone as snakes. Mostly you're going to see Zeus as Demeter's partner. And the reason why that's important is because it has to do with the myth that she is so central in, where Hades kidnaps her and takes her to hell. The story is that either two major reasons have Zeus go and take Persephone, take her to the underworld, whatever the two reasons are. She stays down there, and we don't see her side of the story, really. What we see is Demeter mourning for her. She goes down to the earth and wanders the earth. She meets some humans. She does some things. She's still searching for her daughter. She's in mourning. Eventually, she's so fed up, she just stops caring for the world. Everybody's dying. Zeus comes down and is like, look, come on, we gotta fix this. She says, no. All the gods approach her in various forms, and she will not help. So eventually Zeus sends Hermes to go talk to Hades. Hades, you gotta send the girl back up, the world's dying. So he tricks her into eating a pomegranate, or she already ate one and she lies about it later, depending on the story. She goes back up, she meets her mom again, she's like, Mom, it was so terrible, and they ask her if she ate the fruit. She either says, yes, I did, I didn't know, or she says, no, I didn't do it, and the gardener of Hades tells on her. Either way, it leads to her spending part of her time underground, part of her time with her mom. The story is really, one, a explanation of the growing cycle, not the seasons originally. It was about the planting seasons. In the culture that this first originated in, winter was not the time to be afraid and suffering. It was summer. Nothing grew in the summertime. You would plant things in October, and then in June you would harvest them. And then between June and October were the dead months. It was just too hot. And that was the time it was seen that Persephone was in the underground and nothing would grow. The story shifted as other cultures told it, and the amount of seeds changed depending on the seasons in the culture they were in. If they had a really long and terrible winter for 5 months, then Persephone ate 5 seeds and she was gone for 5 months. Now, I said there were 2 reasons why Hades took Persephone. The first explanation, and the most common, is that he approached Zeus and said, "Hey bro, I want to marry your daughter." And Zeus said, "Cool, you can marry her." And then he did. Which, technically, he's doing the right thing by Greek standards. Probably, maybe. The story is really interesting in that I don't think it presents Zeus, or not Zeus, Hades as necessarily the bad guy. Because in some ways, I think he is kind of, he abided by the rules. He approached the father and asked for the hand in marriage, and then he took and married her, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be a good husband to you." And yet it still presents Demeter and Persephone and their tragedy in a very, very sentimental and sympathetic light, kind of saying, hey, even though socially this is probably okay, is it really okay? There are theories that it has to do with the fact that a lot of these cultures originally were very mother goddess centered before the northern cultures invaded and brought their sky gods, and that's possibly why there are so many stories of male sky gods forcing themselves on the mother goddesses. But that leads to the story of Persephone going underground. Even though the original myth that explains how she ends up there is not sympathetic to the situation, like it's not presenting Hades in a good light or the underworld in a good light. In almost every other presentation of her, she's enjoying being queen of the underworld and seems to like it. There's actually a spell from the ancient Greece where I believe the woman, she's calling on the underworld and all of its powers to, I believe, get revenge. There are 2 lines that specifically reference Persephone. The first one is, "Persephone who hates her mother in heaven." The second is, "Shall I tell what kind of food it is that keeps you there, Persephone? Under the huge mass of earth, what bond of love unites you with the gloomy king of night? What defilement you suffered to make your mother not want to call you back?" She becomes this really powerful magical figure. There's an author that refers to the pair of them as Hades and Terrible Persephone. She's associated heavily with Hecate, which is the goddess of magic, and a couple of other female goddesses that are very powerful and magical. Even though she originally started as this, like, goddess of youth and spring and grain, she ends up taking on this much darker aspect. She is possibly also the maiden whose name shall not be named, or should not be spoken, is one reference possibly to her, and also referred to as the strange and awesome. Let's see here. 472. Got some excerpts to read for y'all. I think this one's another spell on an ancient papyrus. The spell is actually a magical prayer to Selene, the goddess of the moon, but it references Persephone multiple times, which is another example of how she's associated with all these female goddesses. Let's see here. "Come to me, O beloved mistress, 3-faced Selene, kindly hear my sacred chants. Nights ornament young, bringing light to mortals, O child of morn who rides upon fierce bulls. O queen who drives your car on equal course with Helios, who with the triple forms of triple graces dance and revel with the stars. Your justice and Lemures threads, Clotho and Lachesis and Atropos. 3-headed, your Persephone, Megara, Alecto, many-formed, who arm your hands with dreaded murky lamps, who shake your locks of fearful serpents on your brow, who sound the roar of bulls out from your mouth, whose womb is decked out with the scales of creeping things." It goes on quite a while describing all that, but it associates Persephone also with Megara and Alecto, who are 2 of the Furies we'll talk about later, with the 3 Fates, with Selene, goddess of the moon, a lot of these different prayers and spells associate her with all these very powerful dark figures. So she kind of takes on more of the dark magical aspect, and a lot of the grain and earth aspects are held to her mother, rather than saying that, you know, when Persephone's out on the land, she's the earth goddess. She is, but most of what I've found really focuses a lot harder on the dark side. Speaking of, here we are with Mama Demeter. So as I said, she's probably originally a goddess that was a triple goddess. There's actually a story that refers to her and Persephone as the two goddesses, associating both of them as pieces of a whole, but eventually was just the Earth Mother or the Grain Mother. Also Thesmophoros, who gives laws, and Erinyes, which is possibly, she was the first Fury, which is the vengeful judges of the underworld. We will talk about later. She was probably from the area of Greece called Crete, and was a severe beauty with hair as fair as ripened grain. One image of her is, I could not find this image, but it's hilarious to imagine. A horse's head surrounded by serpents. In one hand, she holds a dove, and in the other hand, she holds a dolphin. And that is apparently an image of her. She represents cultivated soil. Gaia and Rhea are goddesses of the earth in general, just dirt. But she is the goddess of fertilized earth and growing things, of corn, fruits. She's also called one of the suffering gods, because the story with losing Persephone and mourning her for part of the year gives her this association with loss and with death and suffering that makes her far more sympathetic to mortals. She's also more important because she's the goddess of food. You know, the mortals really care a lot about Demeter, and also about Dionysus, who we'll talk about later. Demeter and Dionysus are heavily associated. There's one writer that says, what angers one angers the other. Because both are very associated with growing things, with mortals, with death and life and rebirth. They have a lot more in common, and both of them have very important, very popular mystery religions. Dionysus has the Orphic and the Dionysian religions, and then the Eleusinian mysteries are Demeter's, and they have to do with the whole story of Persephone being lost and coming back. Again, mystery religions are religions that we know about, but we don't know a lot about because they were secret societies. They had secret rituals. We didn't know what they were doing, but Demeter was the center of one of them. Alright. She was, let's see here, we have a quote here that says, she gave pleasing laws to cities. She was the first to reap the wheat stalk, sacred sheaves of grain, and the first to send in oxen to thresh it. There's theories she was possibly a more powerful mother goddess that had more to do with the world in general and not just planting, and was probably, you know, subliminated when Zeus and the gang moved in. Alright, speaking of people moving in, we're to Poseidon, who possibly was, let's see, don't they tie Demeter to vampires? You know, I don't know. I have never heard this. It's interesting. I will have to look that up. Anyway, Poseidon is probably another god who was an older figure who got pushed aside when other gods moved in, specifically Zeus. Zeus has this habit of being, it seems, from what we've seen archaeologically and story-wise, he moves into town and other gods get pushed aside. His name means master, from the Latin potens, and in Sparta, he was actually called Genethilos, which means creator. So this kind of stuff kind of implies he might have been a more powerful and important god in a kind of Zeus position before he got pushed aside. He is the national god of the Peloponnese. Similar to Zeus, he's typically portrayed chest bare, you know. He's standing with his trident. He's a little less serene. He has a thick beard and disorderly hair and a careworn expression. But a lot of the times he looks very similar to his brother Zeus. He's the god of earthquakes, of fecundity, vegetation, horses and bulls, both of which are very associated with male fertility. So he may have something to do with that. Bulls were sacrificed to him, and he actually has a lot to do with the story of Minos and the Minotaur, because he kind of is the reason for the Minotaur, but we'll get to that. Yes, Poseidon and Zeus and Hades are all brothers, and Demeter's their sister, as so is Hestia, goddess of the hearth, who does not appear in these stories. Poseidon was the shaker of the land and the unharvested sea, god of the deep, tamer of horses, and savior of ships. Ares! I really like the design for this character in Hades, and the fun thing is, of the gods, he's probably the one we have the least, like, specific idea of what he looked like, only because he wasn't, well, two reasons. He doesn't have as many statues as everybody else does. It's a lot more common to find him in vase paintings, where he tends to be a youth, either, like, naked or mostly naked, with a spear and a helmet. But the thing is, nobody liked him. It's mentioned in the Iliad that Zeus says to his face, "I don't like you. You were my least favorite son." He was not liked among the Olympians, and he wasn't liked among the humans. One of the major stories involving him is his embarrassment being caught with Aphrodite in bed when they were cheating, together. They were not, he was not a very popular god because he was the god of war, the brutality of war. Now, war can be a lot of various things, but when you think of war as we're being invaded, I'm going to protect my home, I'm going to protect my city, I'm going to do what's right, that's Athena. Athena has all the noble parts of war. Ares is just the nasty part. And so nobody liked him. He probably came from Thrace and Scythia, that area. He had very little fixed image, but he did have two kids, Terror and Hate. For the most part, he was a furious god, by nature wicked and fickle. But there is one story about him that I did kind of like. He is the first god to be tried for murder. Think, well, duh, obvious. Why? He murdered one of the sons of Poseidon for sexually assaulting his daughter. He was acquitted. Ares did one good thing. We like Ares for that. Artemis! I love Artemis. I think it's very fun that her brother's not in this game. Poor Apollo. He's I like that god, I do, but it's nice to see Artemis get her day. She is the Lady of Wild Things, also known as Artemis Argotera, which means, basically, she's the goddess of the hunt and the chase. Apollousa, I believe, was her name. I can't remember what that one means, but she had a lot of different epithets. She might have been a primitive agricultural deity that eventually evolved into more of a hunting deity. She never really had a partner. The closest she got to that was Orion the Hunter, who ends up being... I always forget to silence my phone. Let me grab that. Anyway, she was a perpetual virgin, like many of the female goddesses. She was very sacred and beloved in Arcadia, which is kind of in central Greece. Depicted as a severe beauty, sometimes with stars and moons around her head, with her hair drawn back or gathered in a knot. She had a short tunic that would stop above the knees, with a girdle, and usually had a dog or a deer with her. She's very associated with the moon, because a lot of reasons. But what happened, basically, is that she and her brother become associated with the sun and moon and kind of take over for the previous gods of the sun and moon, Helios and Selene, who were titans from the previous generation. They kind of get absorbed into these two younger gods who take on those images. She was the goddess of the chase and forests, as I said, and also of sudden death. There was this idea that if someone died suddenly, she struck them with an arrow and they were gone. She was also the goddess of childbirth. She she helped those people who were giving birth. The hunt, the goddess of the moon, and she was very fond of bears. The bow and arrow are her delight, and the slaughter of wild beasts on the hills. The lyre, the clear hunting call, the shadowy glens and cities of righteous men. Athena! She had a lot of epithets. She was Athena Proinoia, which meant the foreseeing, because she always could tell what was going to happen. She was so wise, so smart. Or Athena Promachos. Promachos or Promachai are frontline soldiers in Greece. So they're saying here, she fights on the front line. She is out there. She was possibly originally a storm goddess. One of the reasons being that she has a title of the brilliant or the flashing eyes, and the idea like lightning striking in her eyes. So that may be where she came from. She's the daughter of Zeus and Metis. You may have heard that only Zeus gave birth to her. That's not quite what happened. Metis was wisdom, and she and Zeus hung out and did their thing. And then a prophecy was foretold that said, hey, the child of Zeus and Metis will be even wiser than Zeus. And Zeus said, that can't happen, and swallowed the pregnant Metis whole. Then he gets a headache over time, and either Prometheus or Hephaestus strikes him in the head, and out pops Athena. She literally is born full grown, in full armor, sprung from his head alone. It's funny he tried to kill her because she ends up being his favorite goddess. She can get him to do anything, which possibly explains her role in the game of Hades. She appears helmeted with a spear in her hand, very long dress with the aegis covering her breasts, and often is presented with owls, obviously. She was the goddess of wisdom, reason, purity, weaving. She was the goddess of the city. She invented pottery, patron of architects, spinners, weavers, these jobs which were all, craftsmen, and she was the protector of towns. Like I was saying earlier, when you think of war for an honorable reason, that was Athena rather than Ares. Ares actually says to Zeus at one point, "Thou never curbest neither by word nor deed. She does as she pleases." Basically saying he lets Athena get away with everything. He's just jealous because nobody likes him. Athena, in one story, or in one writer's work, somebody says, "Athena, sacker of cities, golden-helmed, who revels in the clash of horses and shields." She likes war, but for a good cause. Alright. We're on to Zeus! Oh boy. Everybody knows Zeus, and everybody knows Zeus's problems. Zeus was probably one god that ended up, he was the Aryan folks that came in, I believe from the north, conquered lower Greece areas, brought their god with them. They brought a sky god with them, and as they moved in and brought their sky god, they took over certain places. And when that happens, when you have cultures intertwine, typically one religion or the other doesn't go away. They typically fuse and mesh, and things change. You will usually see either the god's new god becoming a member of the old family, or will replace one of the gods. They'll keep the same stories, change the name. The theory is that that's what happened with Zeus, and that these people would bring this guy with them, conquer a place, and replace the head honcho of that place with Zeus. But then the head honcho of that place had a wife. And then, the culture would say, "Hey, what happened to wife?" And they'd go, "Oh, well, that can be Zeus's wife too." And then they'd have to explain how Zeus ended up with yet another lady. This is one theory behind why Zeus gets around so much. It might be because conquerors took over these places, brought Zeus with them, and Zeus kind of took the wife of whatever god was around. He had multiple wives. Metis, I mentioned, wisdom. He ate her. Thetis was law. He left her. Mnemosyne, which was memory. He had 9 nights of lovemaking with her, and each night one of the muses was born. Then he was with Demeter, and that's how Persephone happened. And then Hera, and that's how Ares happened. But that's not where it stopped, of course. Leto gave birth to Artemis and Apollo. He had an affair with Electra. He had an affair with a titan named Maia, and that's how Hermes came about. He was with Ganymede, which was a male person, a human he thought was so handsome, he had an eagle kidnap him. You know how you do. See a cute guy on the street and you kidnap him with an eagle. But at least he made him the cupbearer to the gods, so Ganymede got turned into an immortal. That's probably a step up. You get to bone down with Daddy Zeus and be immortal. That's pretty great. In appearance, he was a man in the fullness of maturity, with a robust body, a grave countenance, and broad forehead jutting above deeply set eyes. His face is framed by thick waving hair and a finely curled beard. He is rarely nude, which is a fun note. He wears a long mantle, but his chest and right arm are free, presumably for throwing. The scepter will be in his left hand, thunderbolt in his right, and an eagle at his feet with a crown of oak leaves in his hair. One quote from Aeschylus says, "Zeus is sky, Zeus is earth, Zeus is heaven, Zeus is everything and all that is beyond these things." So yeah, he sure is, he gets around. I believe in the game Hades, they actually make a comment about how it's all rumor, and, you know, if you believed it, he gave, you know, he was the father of half the pantheon. I think it's fun that they allude to it. Dionysus! One of my favorites of all time. So we started today talking about Zagreus, and how he was originally a mythic figure who is killed and resurrected, and how he had these very powerful, important myths, but he kind of vanishes from history because another god took him. And that god was Dionysus. And he didn't just take from Zagreus. Dionysus had a bad habit of taking from everybody. He is more than likely an import from another culture because he has a lot in common with a Vedic god named Soma and Osiris from Egyptian tradition. He is also torn to pieces, resurrected by a goddess, and made king of the underworld. He has a lot in common with those gods. In the Greek tradition, he is the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele, which makes him the only only half-human kid in the pantheon. Hera doesn't like the fact that, you know, there's another one around. So she tricks Semele while she's pregnant into asking Zeus to show his full form, and it kills her. But either Zeus or Hermes saves the fetus, baby Dionysus, and he is rescued and sent into hiding. He's raised by nymphs and satyrs and wild maiden women, and is called Dithyrambus, which means double birth. Of course, we mentioned earlier, the Orphic tradition says that he has 3 births, where they associate the story of Zagreus getting torn apart by the Titans. They say that happened to Dionysus, and that he is the guy that's been reborn and you know, defeated death so many times. He travels the world for quite a while when he is grown up. Hera curses him with madness at one point. I believe Demeter cures him, but madness becomes his power and something that follows him. He goes so many different places and just leaves chaos in his wake. In one city, the king didn't like him being there. He made the king go mad. He thought he saw his son. The king saw his son and thought he was a grapevine, so he took an axe and chopped him to pieces, and then later was trampled to death by horses. Another city, there was I don't remember what this guy did to him, but Dionysus set his raving mad women on them, and tore them to pieces. There's a lot of tearing to pieces in Dionysus myths, which is possibly related to the older Zagreus myths, where Zagreus was a hunter of living flesh and was known to eat raw meat and tear things apart. Probably had something to do with it. Archaeologically, he is the god that we find the oldest evidence for. Beyond Zeus, beyond Poseidon, he seems to be the oldest of the gods, which makes sense if he was an import from another culture. And he actually did. He had 2 partners that I've found. He may have had more, who knows. One of them is Ariadne, who you may know from the myth where she was turned into a spider, or was it the spider one? She's the weaver, I think. Am I confused? I'm gonna double check this real quick. The myth I know she appears in is Theseus. When Theseus goes to deal with the Minotaur, she falls in love with him and gives him this string that'll let him get out of the maze. Either he I apologize. I'm trying to work on having hotkeys. I don't have a separate device. I've been using my keyboard, and I must have hit the button for my mic. Which button was my mic? I thought it was this one over here. Oh, I must have hit that by accident. Where did I leave off? Arachne! That's who I was confusing Arachne with. I knew they weren't the same person, but the name was very similar. Okay, so, Arachne, I was talking about how she gets abandoned. She was taken in by Dionysus. He took pity on her and fell in love with her and married her. Before her, he had a male lover who was a satyr who challenged the gods and got killed by wild boars. But it's okay because Dionysus made wine from his blood. So, 3 cheers for the dead gay satyr. Dionysus was depicted sometimes as very effeminate, sometimes as very masculine. His depictions, like if we go back to the other here, that's a far more effeminate pose than if you think about the way that like Zeus and Poseidon are very straight-backed and very, he's like, like this, like, hey, a far more effeminate figure. He is, usually has a man in the bloom of youth with beautiful dark hair waving around him, and on his strong shoulders a purple robe. Usually beardless, long curly hair crowned with vine leaves and bunches of grapes. Sometimes he wears animal skin. One hand he will hold wine, and in the other the thyrsus, which is what you see he has in the game. It's a staff that has a pine cone on top that was used in a lot of his ceremonies in the mystery religions. Represented hedonism, fertility, and prosperity. Let's see. God of drama, vegetation, warm moisture, vines, pleasures, civilizations, and in the Orphic tradition, he is the supreme god. Some of his old traditions were real wild. They burned children to death in the oldest versions of his sacrifices. They were very dark. They got better. They killed goats and animals and things, and possibly tore people to pieces. The Romans banned his events at one point. Like, these things got out of hand. They were very wild. He was the god of freedom, ecstatic joy, and savage brutality. Now, I have, one of the things I love about him, he is one of the many, many, many people that has traveled to the underworld. We'll talk more about some of them later. Once he's a god fully formed in Olympus, he goes down into the underworld himself and saves his mom, his human mom, brings her up to Olympus with him. Good on him for not forgetting the human mom. There's also a story by Aristophanes, a playwright, called The Frogs. It's such a funny premise. Dionysus finds out that Euripides, a playwright, died, and he says, "No, I liked him. I'm gonna go get him back." And he and this buddy of his, basically, go to the underworld. And it's a comedy where Dionysus keeps messing up and doing stupid stuff while trying to go to the underworld and rescue this playwright. It's very, very interesting that, that it kind of takes the very classic idea of the journey to the underworld and turns it into something of a farce where, the whole thing keeps getting messed up. He keeps getting mistaken for Hercules, and people in the underworld are mad at Hercules, and all this stuff keeps happening. It's pretty great. Alright. There's that. Hermes! Oh man, we're getting to some of the fun stuff. I'm excited to talk about Hermes. Hermes was likely originally a god of the twilight or of the wind, probably from Thrace, and was far older than most of the other gods. He was the master thief, also known as Argifontes, which means he who makes the skies clear. He was the psychopompus, which is conductor of souls, since he is the one that takes, when the soul dies, he takes them to the doors of the underworld, and then from there they go to Charon into the boat. He was also Diactoros, the messenger. He is the son of Zeus and Maya, which was a titan. The only one of his ill-gotten children that Hera didn't hate. Hera actually suckled Hermes. Everybody likes Hermes. This dude does not have enemies. He actually also got around a little bit, even though he doesn't seem to have had a permanent partner. There are stories of him with Aphrodite, him with Hecate, him with Persephone, and various nymphs and mortals. He was the god of travel and merchants. And the reason for that is, in the old days, why would you travel if you weren't a merchant? Most people stayed the same place their whole lives. Merchants traveled, and so a lot of what he was known for was associated with the fact that originally he was the god of travelers, first and foremost. Especially consider the underworld, that's the great, journey we all make. So he was the god of messengers, of commerce, of eloquence, the divine herald to the dead, god of crossroads. He invented racing, invented the lyre, and he also helped everybody. Tons of stories have him helping gods and humans and demigods out of sticky situations. Like I said, he was known, he was very well liked, and he was seen as the benefactor of mankind. The first day he was born, he pulled a prank on his brother. Very first thing he did, he came out of the womb and said, "I'm gonna pull a joke," and Zeus thought it was hilarious. His sacred places are the crossroads, and he had a lot of statues on the side of the road where, people would see as they were traveling, and what they would see was a square pillar with a bust of his head and a phallus. Just right underneath, the guy have the penis. Statues typically depicted him as erect. That's important. He was presented as an athlete with his hair bound, curls, sometimes bearded, but typically more like a young gymnast. Lithe and graceful, largely exposed by his cloth, like upper torso. He wore a winged hat called a petasus and winged sandals, and of course had the caduceus, which was, his fancy magic statue, or staff. He became heavily associated with magic to the point of, hermetic means, occult traditions. It's a huge thing. He was very important to those kind of traditions. He was the god of many a wile and cunning counsel, a robber, a driver of cattle, a bringer of dreams, a watcher of the night, a thief of the gates. Alright, I love Hermes, and I'm gonna, to get more gay shit in here, we're gonna read a story that I really like. 283. This is from the ancient writer Lucian. It is Hermes and Apollo discuss Hyacinthos. We're going to say it that way. Now, this is actually about Apollo's male lover, Hyacinthos, who was a young man that was caught in a love triangle. Unfortunately, Apollo loved him, and so did Zephyrus? What does it say here? The wind was in love with him. And so unfortunately, the wind got jealous, and one day when Apollo and Hyacinthus were playing frisbee like you do, the wind threw the frisbee into his head so hard he died. And so here, Apollo afterwards is very sad, and he's talking to Hermes, his brother, about it. "Why are you depressed, Apollo?" "Because I'm so unlucky in love, Hermes." "That's worth hurting over. But how are you unlucky? Or do you just mean you're still hurting about that whole Daphne thing?" "No, I'm over that. I'm grieving for a boyfriend, the Spartan, the son of Obolos." "Do tell, is Hyacinthus dead?" "Very dead." "Who did it, Apollo? I mean, who could be so heartless that he would kill that beautiful guy?" "I did it." "Did you go crazy, Apollo?" "No, it was a bit of an unfortunate accident." "How? I want to hear how it happened." "He was learning to throw the discus, and I was practicing with him. But that damned wind, Zephyros. See, he'd been in love with him for a long time, but the boy didn't pay attention to him, and he couldn't take being ignored. He did it. I threw my discus up like I always do, but he flew down from the mountain and moved it and slammed it into the boy's skull, so a lot of blood gushed from the wound, and the boy died there and then. Well, right away, I shot an arrow at him and made him run off. I chased him all the way back to the mountain. As for the boy, I raised a tomb for him in a mist clay where the discus got him, and I made the earth send up a flower for his blood. The nicest and brightest flower of all, Hermes. It even has letters that spell out a lament for the deceased. Do you think my grief is unreasonable?" "Yes, I do, Apollo. You knew you'd chosen a boyfriend who was mortal. Don't be upset he died." I love it. I love it. He's mortal. He was gonna die. You know, even if it was death by frisbee, you can't be upset. Mortals are gonna die. I love that view from Hermes. It seems like something he'd say. And of course, the myth of Hyacinthus, the idea there is that the hyacinth, the flower, comes from his blood and was created by Apollo. Savage. Alright, my favorite. We've finally gotten to the best and, in my personal opinion, most interesting figure, which is so obvious that I would love this one once you learn a little more about her. Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Love in all forms. Now, you've probably all heard the myth that she was born from sea foam. Specifically, that in the ancient times, when the Titans, the original Titans that were fighting their parents, before the Olympians even existed, the Titans were fighting their parents, and a guy named Kronos cuts off Ouranos, the sky, he cuts off the guy's dick, throws it in the ocean, and the blood from it creates Aphrodite out of the sea foam, which implies that she is almost primordial. She's the daughter of the sky, which is one of the oldest figures, older than, you know, the sky is Zeus's grandpa, so that would make her far older and more powerful than him, and that's a very interesting story. It's not the oldest one. The oldest one is that Aphrodite's the daughter of Zeus, and it's kind of a very typical and boring story compared to the other, and more than likely, people were bored of it, and they were like, no, what's more interesting? The theory is that Aphros is Greek for foam. It's unsubstantiated. Probably was created by writers later on. Either way, that's the more popular theory, and it makes her a little more important and powerful if she's even older than Zeus. She has a lot of names. Aphrodite Urania is the celestial, love in its purest form. Aphrodite Pandemos is the common. Aphrodite Porne is the courtesan, and she was very honored by prostitutes. All of her sculptures were made, well, I can't say all, but many of her sculptures were made by modeling courtesans, very famous courtesans. And there was actually one city in particular that honored her after a courtesan was murdered by the wife of a guy. The city got pissed and they honored Aphrodite in the courtesan's honor. There was also Aphrodite Pelagia, which was the water goddess. We'll come back to her names in just a second. She was possibly from the Phoenician area, and was very heavily influenced by Eastern gods, probably brought over by merchants, a fertility goddess related to like Ishtar and traditions like that. She had many partners. Ares, of course, Hephaestus was her husband, and she had a thing for Adonis. She was usually depicted as nude, or at the least you could see a titty, you know, if it wasn't the whole thing. She had gleaming hair, silvery feet, and an aura of seduction. From the moment she was born, among gods and humans, she fulfilled the honored function that includes virginal sweet talk, lovers' smiles and deceits, and all the gentle pleasures of sex. On her face, she always wore an amiable smile. Now, there was even a version of her that was a warrior that was worshipped in Sparta. Let's get to the interesting bit. She exists across Greece in many, many forms. And one of those forms, there's a couple, but one is called the bearded Aphrodite, or Venus barbata, which was Aphrodite wearing female clothes with a beard and a masculine figure. And this was the hermaphrodite, the intersex Aphrodite. She is the mother of Hermaphroditus, who is the figure in a legend where her son ends up attracting the attention of a nymph who falls in love with him, and he doesn't want anything to do with her, so she pleads with the gods to make them one, and they become one individual, which is an ancient story trying to explain the existence of intersex people. Because of that, and her relationship to him, she is associated with intersex people and with homosexuals. Hermes is also the father of Hermaphroditus, so he is associated as well. She was also often known as Aphroditus, which is the male version of her name, or Venus, which of course is her name in Roman, which is a male end of the name. You know, us instead of Vena. Venus Castina is another possible name for her. This one, the source for this one is a lot newer, but it kind of matches some of the other ideas, which was the yearning of feminine souls locked up in male bodies, which was the idea that she was the patron of homosexuals. There's a story where she, her temple, I believe, was invaded, and she got mad at the people that did that, so she cursed them with the female sickness, which made, I guess, a lot of... It's a little vague, but it either made them a lot of hermaphrodites or a lot of homosexuals, maybe both. Possibly this is an explanation for why a certain area had a lot of those kinds of people. It was said to have happened in Scythia. But she was the patron of prostitutes, homosexuals, hermaphrodites, love and sexuality in all forms. Basically, she was the ancient queer goddess. Obviously, the Greeks had a lot more of that going on in their mythology than we always know about, but she particularly has a lot of that going on. Of course, Zeus has some stories. I've mentioned Apollo has some stories. Dionysus has some. A lot of them did. They were a lot more open with that kind of thing. They have a story explaining how, where the idea of sexuality came from for them. There's this myth that says that all people used to be two people in one body, and they were split asunder to create individuals, and then you spend your entire life looking for your other partner. And the explanation was, if you were split from another man and you were a man, that's why you desire men, or, vice versa. Gonna read you a poem to Aphrodite, page 393. Here we go. Immortal Aphrodite, on your richly crafted throne, daughter of Zeus, weaver of snares, I beg you, do not with sorrows and with pains subdue my heart, O lady, but come to me, if ever at another time as well, hearing my voice from far away you heeded it, and leave your father's house of gold you came, yoking your chariot. Graceful sparrows brought you swiftly over the black earth with a thick whirring of wings, from heaven down through the middle air. Suddenly they were here, and you, O blessed, with a smile on your immortal face, asked me what was wrong this time, and why I called you this time, and what in my maddened heart I wanted most to happen. Whom shall I persuade this time to welcome you in friendship? Who is it, Sappho, that wrongs you? For if she flees now, soon she shall pursue. If she refuses presents, she shall give them. If she does not love, soon she shall love, even against her will. Come to me now as well, release me from this agony. All that my heart yearns to be achieve, and be yourself my ally in arms. That is the ancient poem, let's see, yeah, it's just called Prayer to Aphrodite, by Sappho, the original Sapphic. She was fond of Aphrodite, obviously. She was an ancient Greek poet known for writing to women, even though later historians tried to spin it. It's really fun reading all these works that are from like the 70s and earlier, try to explain all these ancient Greek myths that are very queer and they don't want to know about that. Like the line that said that Zeus brought Ganymede to Olympus to be his favorite. Don't know what that means. There's a lot of them that heavily call Achilles and Patroclus close friends, even though they're actually lovers. There's a lot of that. It's quite fun. All right, the Furies. Where did I put them? They're down here. They are also called the Erinyes. There's three of them. Alecto, which means unending. She represented anger. Tisiphone, retaliation. She represented murder. And Megara, which was envious fury, and she represented jealousy. I don't know why two of those are emotions, and one of those is a crime, but here we are. They were also known as the Eumenides, which was the kindly ones, specifically in Athens, because one time they threatened to destroy Athens, and the gods said, please don't do that, and they said, okay. And that's why Athens says, oh, you're so kind for not destroying us, thank you. Sometimes they're the children of Night and the river Acheron. Sometimes they're born of the blood of Ouranos from the dick-cutting thing, like Aphrodite. They had bat wings, hair made of snakes with soiled gray robes. They were intolerably stinky. They had poisonous discharge from their eyes. They wielded brass-studded whips, flaming torches, and snakes. They were also, one of the book I read specifically said they were obviously virgins. But I think they meant virginal, like, you know, a lot of the female goddesses were perpetual virgins. Something interesting I found, one of the major stories involving them is Orestes, which is a play that has to do with some other plays. Basically, Orestes has to kill his mom because his mother killed his father, and because of that, the Furies come after him. In the game, they're shown as being torturers in hell. In the oldest Greek myths, they tortured people on Earth. They were the punishment that came if you broke social mores, specifically murdering members of your family, sexual crimes against your family, social taboos being broken would lead to the Furies following you, driving you mad, and punishing you for all eternity. That's what happened to Orestes because he murdered his mom, even though it was revenge for his dad. Now, because of the complication, Apollo takes an interest and tries to help Orestes, and eventually he does get to have a kind of trial where he gets to proclaim his innocence and defend himself against the Furies. They eventually let him go, because they're seen as being just characters. They are not evil. They just enjoy their jobs. They were seen as flying crones who harass people for breaking social codes. Not even the sun will transgress his orbit, but the Erinyes, the ministers of justice, overtake him. They did exist in hell. That was seen to be their home, but for a long time, that's not like where their job was. Later on, they start to be associated with punishing people in the underworld. A line that specifically interested me from Orestes is one of the Erinyes threatens to suck the red blood from his body, which one of the Alecto in Hades constantly talks about Hades' red blood. I think that's very interesting that she calls him a red blood, and I wonder if it's not a reference to Orestes. It's very interesting. Alright, and now we're to Hypnos and Thanatos. Sleep and